Chapter 10. Reform of the Reform. This is my summary of Absolute Power by Paul Collins. To begin with, a conclave was held on the 18th of April 2005, and Joseph Ratzinger became Pope Benedict XVI. He was elected at the age of 78 years old, and he was seen as a transitional pope. Context. Ratzinger was a scholarly but shy man. He lived in Bavaria and had no sympathy for the Nazis, and also was unwillingly drafted into the Hitler Youth and German army. After the war, he entered seminary and was influenced by the likes of Saint Augustine. He was interested in the Ressourcement movement, which focused on the recovery of the early church theology and liturgy. He was ordained in 1951 and worked in the universities like Bonn in 1958, Munster, and became professor of dogmatic theology at Tübingen in 1966 and worked in Regensburg in 1969. He wrote an essay in Karl Rahner's book, The Episcopate and the Primacy, which argued for the defense of the primacy of the Pope as the source of unity, but also agreed that the bishops have an active role as well, being the successors of the apostles and not just representatives of the Pope. The Eucharist was central to unity amongst the local churches of the Universal Church. He helped in the Vatican II Council, being an important theologian, and developed texts like the De Verbum, or On Divine Revelation. Despite the reform taking place in the council, he disliked the vernacular liturgy and student rights that occurred in 1967-68. In 1977, he was appointed by Paul VI to become Archbishop of Munich Freising, and he also became a cardinal. Local priests saw him as distant, since Ratzinger was more of an intellectual as opposed to having pastoral experience. Pope John Paul II appointed Ratzinger to become prefect of the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, or the CDF, in 1981 to 2005. During this time, he was very busy publishing the Catechism of the Catholic Church, reviewing documents, disciplining authors and theologians, issuing condemnations against the liberation theology, and created a joint declaration with Lutherans on justification. In 2001, sexual abuse cases were to be investigated by the CDF under papal secrecy. He appointed the CDF assistant Tarcisco Bertone to be Secretary of State in 2006, but Bertone was incompetent and had no diplomatic experience, and he also hired his own people which maligned professionals and sided with controversial figures such as Silvio Berlusconi in 2008. In December of 2005, after his election as Pope, Benedict addressed the Roman Curia and desired a renewal in continuity of the Church, an interpretation of the Vatican II Council that preserved the beliefs and understanding of the faith, but also co-opted the new ideas of ecumenism, religious liberty, and revived old traditions such as the collegiality of bishops. Paul Collins believes that Benedict created a dichotomy and a straw man of the dissident theologians who desired to bring discontinuity. Underpinning Benedict's dichotomy is Neo-Augustinism, which was inspired from Saint Augustine of Hippo, who had a pessimistic view of contemporary culture, stating that salvation comes from above, over depraved men and the Church as the communion of saints. Neo-Thomism, inspired by Thomas Aquinas, focused on theology from below, stating that people have an innate longing for spiritual transcendence and that the Church, being a communion of sinners, has an active relationship with the world, and through the struggle of each context, the Church engages in ecclesia semper reformanda, or persistent reformation. Benedict belonged to the former camp, believing in the idea of the remnant church, one that no longer has any relation with the state due to secularization, and is rather a church that is becoming a minority. This was Eurocentric, since the Church was declining in Europe since the 1960s, but it was still growing throughout the globe. The Society of Saint Pius X, or SSPX. This was founded by Archbishop Michel Lefebvre, a Frenchman who didn't support democracy or the separation of powers, and was a pro-Nazi during the Vichy regime. He trained French-speaking Swiss priests in the Tridentine or Latin Mass, which was dominant between 1570 to 1962, and he opposed the vernacular Mass. He also supported integralism and saw changes in the liturgy as removing divine mystery from worship and a compromise with modernity. He saw the translation of the Mass to vernacular as bland and being in no comparison to the original. In 1975, the Vatican ordered the organization to become suppressed, but Lefebvre ordained priests anyway, causing the Church to suspend his ministry. In 1982, Lefebvre ordained 4 more bishops, and afterwards, he and the 4 bishops were excommunicated. Pope John Paul II and Benedict made an effort to keep lines of communication with the separated SSPX, creating the Ecclesia Dei Commission devoted to this very task. In 2009, Pope Benedict lifted the excommunications, and much later, there was a thing called the Williamson affair, where one of the bishops, Richard Williamson, was a Holocaust denier, causing controversy for the Pope and immediately souring the relationship between Catholics and Jews. Meanwhile, in Bavaria, 2006, Pope Benedict XVI gave a lecture in the University of Regensburg about faith, reason, and the university, memories and reflections. The Pope desired to reconcile faith and reason by making the case against forced religious conversion, discussing that the teachings of Muhammad brought conversion by the sword. This was sensationalized in the Islamic media and led to riot in the Islamic world and the death of a nun. Pope Benedict later apologized, and Secretary of State Bertone was given the blame for not checking the lecture beforehand to the controversy. Dictatorship of relativism. From the perspective of the Pope, he vehemently disavowed postmodernism, relativism, and the idea that there are no objective standards or truth. It threatened rational truth and morality, since it ultimately led to what an individual subjectively feels is right. The English translation of the Mass, directed by the Congregation of Divine Worship, CDW, on the International Commission on English in the Liturgy. It was chaired by the Chilean Cardinal J.M. Estevez in 1996, who was the prefect, and the Australian Cardinal George Pell in 2008 oversaw Vox Clara, which supervised this International Commission of English in the Liturgy. Estevez got the declining Pope John Paul II to accept Liturgam Authenticam, LA, which emphasized an exact translation of the liturgy from the Latin and freed from being dependent on modern modes of expression. Latin. The translation ended up being what Paul Collins described as pseudo-mid-Victorian English, which may have served to turn people away from the church. LA was applied by December of 2011. German bishops rejected this strategy for the translation of the Mass into their language. Summorum, pontificum, 2007. Pope Benedict decreed that all priests can celebrate the Tridentine Mass if the laity desires it. Jesus of Nazareth, a 3-volume book which was written by Pope Benedict and served as an extended sermon to the life of Jesus, but had mixed reviews since it lacked a historical, critical method despite the book claiming to have it. Pope Benedict XVI engaged warmly with young people in World Youth Day in Cologne 2005, Sydney 2008, and Madrid 2011. He met victims of sexual abuse in Australia and the United States. The Pope, however, did not have an interest in running the Roman Curia. The Roman Curia, being traditionalist, also didn't like both John Paul and Benedict. Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano was appointed to fix the financial administration, being Secretary General of the Vatican City. He discovered networks of corruption, money laundering, and waste, and afterwards created a more efficient system that went from nearly 8 million euros in debt to a 34 million euro surplus. E.G. Tedeschi in May 2002 was fired from being chairman of the Vatican Bank by Vigano. Tedeschi leaked Bertone, the Secretary of State. Moneyval Group from Europe's Council 2011 brought to Benedict XVI cases of financing terrorism and money laundering by the bank. A leak surfaced about someone who gave money and access to the Pope, and that someone turned out to be the Pope's butler, Paolo Gabrielli, who was arrested by Vatican guards on the 23rd of May 2012. The butler turned out to be a pawn for some higher-ups in the Roman Curia, seeing that he didn't comprehend much of the case and just did their bidding. Gabrielli was sentenced to 18 months house arrest, but was pardoned by the Pope 7 months later. News of the gay lobby was surfacing. Priests who had struggled with their sexuality and celibacy were told to never admit their proclivities in public. The Italian newspaper La Repubblica 2013 reported that the gay lobby was a group led by cardinals and bishops. The Observer newspaper on the 23rd of December 2013 found that Cardinal Keith O'Brien was accused by 4 priests of inappropriate sexual behavior of homosexual affairs that dated back to the 80s. This added controversy to the supposed gay lobby. Sex abuse scandal. The Pope reduced 800 priests to the lay state, but response was very slow as these cases were processed through the CDF. The various banking, gay lobby, and sex abuse controversies caused Benedict to announce his resignation on the 11th of February 2013 and resigning on the 28th of February. He also saw the decline of Pope John Paul II and didn't want to stay Pope, being senile and incapacitated as he was aging. He was the first Pope to write commentary of his own papacy, which was called Last Testament in his own words, 2016. Pope Benedict XVI described that he was generally disinterested in papal government and that he wasn't to blame for the Gabriele affair. After resigning, Pope Benedict XVI's title was changed to Pope Emeritus Benedict, and this was unprecedented, for it is very rare for a Pope to resign. In summary, we have looked at Ratzinger's early life, his role in the Vatican II Council, and his position in the Congregation of Doctrines of the Faith, his Neo-Augustine views of a remnant church, his support for the Society of Saint Pius X, his ideas on faith and reason, dictatorship of relativism, and organizations such as the Congregation of Divine Worship creating a so-called pseudo-mid-Victorian English translation of the Mass, Pope Benedict's contribution through his ideas on Summorum, Pontificum, Jesus of Nazareth, which are the 2 texts that he wrote, and then the pursuing controversies in the Vatican City Bank, supposed gay lobby, and sex abuse scandal. So join me next time where I'll discuss about Pope Francis and his impact on the Catholic Church. Thanks for watching.